In this final section, we'll run a real Ruby web application. This is one of the many areas where Ruby really excels. The biggest initial driver of Ruby's use in web development came from the choice of Danish programmer David Heinemeier Hansen, also known as DHH for short, to implement a project management application called Basecamp using Ruby. And the main reason is he just really liked Ruby. He thought it was a beautiful language and he wanted to use it. DHH then extracted from Basecamp a framework he called Ruby on Rails. In this section, we'll use a simpler framework that nevertheless has a lot of similarities with Rails. It's called Sinatra. Sinatra is distributed as a Ruby gem, which is a self-contained piece of Ruby software. We'll actually be making a gem later on in this tutorial. But for now, we're just going to install it using the gem command. Now there's one little detail, which is that by default, gems install a lot of documentation that you almost never need. In fact, I don't know if I've ever used the local documentation that gets installed, but it takes a long time. So we're going to create a new file called .gemrc in our home directory using a simple command that you don't have to think about at all. It's just a quick copy and paste to configure the system to ignore all the documentation that takes so long to install. So I'm just going to copy and paste from the tutorial for this. Don't even think about this command. Just copy and paste. Ah, there we go. All right, and now we're ready to install Sinatra using gem install Sinatra. And that's the only prerequisite. We can now run a real web app, which we'll call Hello App. Here it is. Now, if you go to the Sinatra homepage, we can see that there's actually a program right on the front page. Copy it. This is a great way to get started. I'm just going to paste it in. You can see the indentation kind of got screwed up there, but we can get rid of that. So, require Sinatra. By the way, you might notice here we had double quoted strings. Here, single quoted. We'll talk about that in the next chapter. Then I'd like to have a new line here. This requires the Sinatra gem, and then get /Frank says, we're going to change this to just /. And then instead of put this in your pipe and smoke it, we're going to say hello world, like that. And now we can run it using the Ruby command, just ruby hello app.rb. This automatically runs Sinatra because of the require Sinatra line. And you can see here, it says listening on localhost 4567. So this is the address, localhost, and the port number 4567. I can just copy that, paste it in here to the address bar, and there we go. I can make it a little bigger. Hello world. There is one annoying thing here, which is that when we make a change, we actually have to quit and restart. So for example, if I say goodbye world and refresh the browser, nothing changes. I have to quit, restart, like that. We'll see how to get around this restriction using what's called the rerun gem later in this tutorial. I'm going to switch it back. You can see how cumbersome this is. For a bigger project, there's just no way. It's a total deal breaker. Okay, there we go. Now before moving on, I'm just going to take a second to show you how to get this working on the Cloud IDE. This is also good reinforcement just to see it again. It's the same thing, hello app.rb. You can open it up like this. Let's just copy and paste. Like that. Let's create the .gemrc file. install Sinatra. Ruby hello app, the same thing, .rb. And you can see here, it says your code is running at, and then it has this URL. So if you click on that, there we are, it's working. So it's a little bit different, but it's pretty straightforward. All right, let's go back to the local version. And at this point, believe it or not, we're actually going to deploy this application to the live web. The way we're going to do this is with a service called Heroku. And there are instructions in the text on how to get started with a Heroku account. But in any case, the way to deploy to Heroku involves pushing a Git repository, which means as a first step in deployment, we're going to put our repository under version control, and we'll also make a remote repository at a site called GitLab. So let's take a look. These are the standard steps for creating a new Git repository, as covered in Learn Enough Git to be Dangerous, among other places. So git init, git add -a. Some people do git add dot. It's the same thing, but this is what's in the Git documentation, so that's what I do. Git commit with a message. Initialize repository. You can see here I have my command line prompt configured to display the name of the branch, which is master by default. Setting up that configuration is also covered in Learn Enough Git to be Dangerous. And now we're going to put it at a remote repository. Now you might have suspected that we were going to put this at GitHub, but in fact I think it's a good idea always to make web applications private. And this is because web applications often contain things like passwords or API keys, and even if they don't, and they really shouldn't if you're designing it well, it's easy to do it accidentally. So privacy is a good default, and GitLab lets you create private repositories for free. So I suggest creating a new account at GitLab, and then just create a new repo like this. New project. I suggest just calling it Ruby_tutorial, but I already have a project with that name, so I'm going to say Ruby_tutorial video. Create project. And then it's got the instructions here. Just need to do this, remote add origin, and then we can git push -u origin all. It doesn't really matter if you understand all this stuff. It is useful to know which things you can skip, though. These are the only two steps you really need. The remote add origin and the push. We don't have any tags, and we don't have an old origin. So copy this. We can refresh this, and there it is. All right, now it's time to sign up for a Heroku account if you don't have one already, and to follow the instructions linked in the text for installing the Heroku command line client. As you might guess, I already have an account, and I already have Heroku installed, Heroku version. It's up to date. There are also instructions in the text for setting this up on the Cloud IDE. All right, once you've applied your technical sophistication to get Heroku working, creating a new Heroku app is incredibly easy. You just type Heroku create. There is a little configuration you have to do, but it comes right from the Heroku documentation. We need to create a config.ru file and what's called a gem file, which we'll be talking a lot more about later in this tutorial. I could have put this in one touch command, but whatever. I'm just going to paste these from the tutorial. Let's just do this. There you go. This tells our application to use Sinatra, and I didn't even know about this actually. The exact configuration, I had to look it up too when I did this tutorial. And now we have to run a special command to tell our Heroku app to use Sinatra. It's called bundle. And for that, we need the bundler gem, which bundles up all the gems for our application. Then we do bundle install. This reads the gem file, installs the gems. There we go. And we can look at the status. You can see we've added all these files. Let's add them to the repo. And now we're ready to push to Heroku, to the thing we created. It's actually in .git config. Right here. The way we're going to deploy is with Git Push Heroku master. You can see here is the URL. This is a nice little trick. I can hold down Command and actually go right to it. And there it is, hello world. Check it out. This is on guarded earth 11971.herokuapp.com. This is on the live web. It's not a custom domain. As you might guess, you can set that up at Heroku. But this is on the live web. Hello world. When I wrote my first book on web development, which is more than 10 years ago now, my co-author and I weren't even able to teach people how to deploy their applications. It was so hard. But things have come a long way since then. Look at this. We've deployed a simple but real web application to the live web. Being able to do this gives us confidence that later on, when we're ready to build more complex applications, we'll actually be able to ship it and get it in front of our users.